It is hard to believe, but January is just about over, and that means that we are coming to the end of the launch of our 2020 year as we revisit our values as a church in a series that we've entitled It Starts with the Why. Simon Sinek wrote a book with that title. I stole it from him. I didn't come up with it on my own. And in that book, he talks about how people buy not what you do, but why you do it. He's not a Christian. He's not talking about the church. But I believe that those principles apply to us as the church. It's important that we as the church keep our values in front of us. I think this is the third, maybe fourth sermon series in the last 9 years that I've done on our values. Because we have to understand what motivates us. You know, as our leadership and session of the church, our elders, we didn't just decide, we named what our why is as a church. And that comes from our confessions, our understanding that the chief end of man is to know God and enjoy Him forever. And what we do should reflect that. When we say that we're a welcoming church, a loving church, an inviting church, we're not saying that we abandon our convictions. We are saying we want other people to know God and enjoy Him forever. When we say that we're a worshiping church, we're saying that our lives should reflect, not just that we offer a worship service, but that our lives should reflect the glory of God in all things at all times, enjoying the presence of God. When we say that we're a growing church, what we mean by that is that God is moving among us, sharpening us as disciples of Jesus Christ, growing in our depth of faith and our relationship to one another and to Him. See, these are our values, and they reflect our why. That we've been entrusted with the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, to share that with the world and to live it out. And our fourth value, that's on the front of your bulletin that you see every week, all of you just look down at your bulletins, is that we're a serving church. This is the most countercultural aspect of the church, especially in the world that we live today. Because, friends, the gospel reminds us that we've been called to be free. We open our Bibles this morning to the book of Galatians, chapter 5, reading verses 13 through 17. Hear now the reading of God's holy word. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They're in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. Gracious God, we pray this morning that you would write your word on our hearts. That you would open us to the call of what it means to be free. And that we would choose to use that freedom in service to others. We pray this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Social media is here to stay. It's a very interesting aspect of our culture and the communities in which we live. I don't know what it is about screens that makes people feel safe, like they have no filter, they can say and do whatever they want. They feel safe behind that, even though they're putting it out in a public forum for people to see and to judge. It's a fascinating aspect of the human psyche, I think, one that I don't totally understand, but it is there. A few years ago, I watched somebody I know, not a friend, just somebody I know, on social media. They came home from work one day, angry at their boss for some reason, and they went off on social media. They used words I'm not allowed to repeat about who their boss was, about how much they hated their job, and on and on and on. You can probably see where this is going, because the next day, the young man that I knew went into work and lost his job. So, ironically, you would think he'd learned his lesson about social media. He did not, because he got on social media again to talk about how his rights had been violated, how he deserved the right to free speech and could say and do whatever he wanted without consequence, which sounds like a wonderful idea, doesn't it? To which this girl, who I do not know, chimed in. That's the fascinating thing about social media. You get to watch conversations of people you don't really know. This girl, who I do not know, chimes in and says, "That's right, you should sue them. He can't do that. It's free speech. That's your First Amendment right." Ironically, they don't understand that the employer also has and is protected by those First Amendment rights and can also do and say whatever they would like with the business that they own. You see, when the framers put together our Constitution and gave us the First Amendment, so the freedom, free expression of religion, freedom of speech, free assembly, freedom of the press, it wasn't that we could do whatever we wanted without consequence, which sounds wonderful. It was that we could say and do those things without intervention from the government. That's really what it's about. It's not a free ticket to do whatever you want with it. You see, that's the thing about freedom. The irony of freedom is that it actually raises the bar for us. It gives us a higher level of responsibility rather than lowering the bar. We think about this from a historical perspective. Most governments in human history that we know about, most are run by royal people, kings and queens. They're run by dictators, emperors. You get the idea. These people that have power. And I get this as sort of a high view, cursory view of history, but basically how it worked throughout human history is that the people in power provided for the people who weren't. So the people in power provided for the peasants. And as long as the peasants were cared for in human history, as long as they had what they needed, they basically just accepted this system for what it was, because they got what they needed. The responsibility was on those in power to provide, right? And when those in power didn't provide throughout human history, what happened? Revolution, revolt. This is the story of humanity playing out over and over and over again in every culture and every context throughout human history. The people in power have to provide. If they don't, then the people revolt. Then the people in power die, and new people come to power who then have to do it all over again. Do you see this cycle? That's what it is. Now, I get it. It's a very elementary look at human history, but that's the basic of it. And then about 300 years ago, these crazy people came along and said, I think that people should be responsible for themselves. So no longer looking to the powers of the government, whatever that government may be, to provide, but that they should have freedom to be what they want and to do what they want without interference from other people. It's a revolutionary idea, one that we all accept as a current way of life, but this was not normal throughout human history. But here's the thing. That freedom that we gained in this political system gives us a higher sense of responsibility. We have more to do, more to take care of. We cannot rely on someone else. Freedom equals responsibility. You think about this, maybe you were the same. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was to be free from my parents. Not that I didn't love my parents, I did. And not that they didn't love me, they did. But you want to spend what you want to spend, you want to eat what you want to eat, you don't want to live with a curfew, you don't want to live by the rules, and you dream of this day when you'll be an adult and you'll be free to make those decisions. And then I got there. Right? Because I'm not free. I'm still not right. Because that freedom came with a higher responsibility. I have people I have to care for. I have financial limitations that we all have. I have bills to pay, things to do. I've got to go and do and be. Because that freedom that was given to me, maybe living under those rules of my parents wasn't so bad if they provided. I think you get the point. Freedom calls us to a higher way of life. Not alone. Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, is dealing with this same concept. He's trying to get the people of Galatia who live under the Roman Empire to understand that they've been set free by Christ, and they're not bound by the law, and they're not bound by Rome. They're bound to Jesus. But the problem is that Paul's running into some of these brick walls, because what you have going on is there's this, we don't know who it is, but there are these people who are following Paul to the places that he preached and churches that he planted, and they're bringing a different message, that if you want to belong to Jesus, if you want to belong to God, then you have to follow the Old Testament laws and the Old Testament covenants and the dietary restrictions and all those things. And so you have this church in Galatia where a bunch of grown men are deciding to get circumcised, it sounds really painful, in order to belong to Jesus. And Paul is just angry. He's flabbergasted, right? It doesn't make sense to him. Because Paul is saying, no, you belong to Jesus because of Jesus, not because of the law. You've been set free from that. You actually are living into this life of Jesus. And this is what it looks like. So we have a tendency to do this. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant. It was the promise made to Abraham that if you have this mark, then you belong to God. You were part of the covenant. You were part of the promise. You were a child of the promise. And so it makes sense that Jewish converts to Jesus would say, well, if you want to be a part of the covenant, the full covenant, you're going to have this marking. But what that ends up being is that we worship the sign and the symbol. Circumcision was not the mark of salvation. Circumcision was a sign and a symbol of the promise of God. We do this today, by the way. You should come sit on some of the conversations I have with some people about baptism. That they think that by getting their child baptized, that the child somehow is going to be saved from eternal damnation, as if what I do right here in this thing with the water that we get out of the sink in the bathroom is magic sprinkle water that is automatically going to push you into the gates of heaven. That's not how it works. It's not who I am, right? It's a sign and a symbol of the promise. The problem is that the human heart so easily wants to attach our worship to the sign and the symbol rather than the thing that it points us to. Because that's what sign and symbols do, right? Signs tell us what to do. They tell us where to go. They tell us where we are. They guide us. They direct us. Stop sign tells us where to stop. Or where to speed up and not stop if you're going to go through this intersection right here. Signs tell us where we are. When we're on the road, they tell us where we're going. But nobody is on their way to the beach and sees the sign for the beach and goes, yep, we'll stop right here, we made it. The sign points us to something greater, to the place that we're trying to go. Symbols draw us into the story. They remind us of what has been done and what God is doing in us. So that's what the sacraments are to us as the church. Baptism and communion, we do them because they're signs and symbols that point us to the promise. That remind us that we're children of the covenant, not because of what we've done and not because of what we've done to our bodies, but because of what Jesus did to him. That's what Paul's telling the church in Galatia. He writes in verse 1 of chapter 5, he says, for freedom you've been set free. You are no longer bound by the yoke of slavery. A freedom he's pointing them to is reminding them and telling them, you belong to Jesus. You are a child of the promise. Child of the covenant. And what you're set free from is the law. But remember, freedom doesn't lower the bar. It raises it. The freedom that Christ gives to us is not a free ticket to do whatever we want. The freedom that Christ gives to us sets us free from the yoke of slavery that is the law. And what Paul's actually saying to the church in Galatia is that if you want to get circumcised, then what you're binding yourself to is the law. And friends, you'll never get there. You'll never live fully into the image of Christ that is in you and with you if you're bound by the law. Because the law elevates the self. Think about the Pharisees, right? They've elevated the self because they believe they've lived a righteous and good life, that they're better, that they're clean, that they somehow figured it out. Paul's saying to the church, if you want to be that, be that. But you're once again bound by the yoke of slavery. You've been set free to a higher calling. And actually, he says in chapter 5 that the only thing that counts is faith expressed in love. The only thing that matters is faith expressed in love. See, we don't do good because we're required to do it. You cannot, and I think it's a part of the problem with the culture in which we live, you cannot legislate morality. It doesn't work. We don't do good because it's required of us. And the government cannot compel you to do good. And I don't think you need to look any further than the fact that volunteerism in the United States is decreasing at such a rapid rate, it's almost unsustainable. I've been the chaplain at the fire hall for the last 9 years. And for 9 years, I've sat in on meetings about how we do not have enough volunteers. It's not just the fire hall, it's everything in America. Volunteerism in the United States is dropping at rapid rates. Why? Because you cannot compel someone to service. The only thing that counts is faith expressed in love. The question is, what motivates our service? Because we don't do it because it's required of us. We do it out of love. The culture and world that we're a part of wants us to believe that freedom means a free ticket to do whatever we want. That freedom means I can do what I want, when I want, how I want. And then, ironically, on the other end of that, we live in a culture that also tells us that all we need in our lives is love. Sort of that the Beatles taught us that, right? In the 60s, all you need is love. Y'all know it. Love is all you need. They're not wrong. They're not wrong in the statement that all you need is love. But what we are wrong is in how the culture will define that love. Because love, to the world in which we live, is acceptance. Let me do and be free how I want, when I want, however I want. And if you don't accept that definition of love, then you're full of hate. And those are your only two options in this world. The Beatles were not wrong that all we need is love. But the world has the definition of love backwards. Because love requires something more of us. Paul says that you've been set free. But do not use that freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. We live in a world that has tried to simultaneously elevate the self and tell us that all we need is love. And those two things are diametrically opposed to each other. We cannot be selfish and loving at the same time. It doesn't work. Because love requires sacrifice. Love requires something of you that you have to give up. And Paul gives us a choice. can use our freedom to indulge the flesh, or as we would say, the self. To satisfy the self, to elevate the self, as many in our world and culture have chosen to do. Or we can serve one another humbly in love. But we can't do both. And that's where we get stuck. The way the world defines love is easy. Because it requires nothing of you except total acceptance. But it doesn't mean you have to do anything. But the way that Jesus defines love, that's hard. Because Jesus says, and Paul quotes in Galatians, that the entire law, all of the law is wrapped up in this. And he's saying to the Galatians, you want to follow the law, here's the law that you should follow. All of the law can be found in this one command that Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. You see, to be a serving church, there is only one metric by which we should go by. One question that we have to ask ourselves. How have we loved our neighbor? That's it. How have we loved our neighbor? We loved him like Jesus. Who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God as something to hold on to. But he lowered himself in the form of a servant, taking on human flesh, and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. This is the power of the cross. One love. Love requires sacrifice. Love requires that you give something up. Because Jesus came not to serve, not to be served, but to serve. How do you come? This is such a countercultural way of living in the United States today. We've elevated the self. And so what we want to know is what you can do for me. We become slaves to me. So that's the irony. We'll be slaves to something. To the self, to the world, or to Jesus. JFK's most famous line in his 1961 inauguration. Ask not what your country can do for you. You all know it, but what you can do for your country. You hear any politician laying that out for us today? If you think your political party is somehow better than this, you're wrong. Because all that we have right now are promises to us. What can you do for me? And if you can do it for me, then I'll give you my vote. That's the way that we're operating. We come to the church and we say, what do you have to offer for me? What can you do for me? What programs? What services? What do you have? We've just turned into consumers of religious goods and services. The question we should be asking is, how do we love our neighbor? What can we do to be participants in God's redemptive story in people's lives out in the world out there? How can we participate in the kingdom of God? Because, friends, you are children of a promise. been set free. How will you use that freedom? You see, the freedom that Christ offers to us raises the bar. It gives us a greater responsibility to be participants in His good work in this world. To be a church that claims to be a serving church. And the only question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we love our neighbor? Friends, if you can't answer that question deep in your heart, there a moment in your life recently where you've loved your neighbor, that we've got to do a little introspection on what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. Because the opportunity is there. You can serve a community dinner down in Butler once a month to the hungry and the needy. Go on a mission trip to Florida to help rebuild homes for people who have lost them. That's loving your neighbor. You can pack a lunch on the third Sunday of every month for somebody who's hungry. You can volunteer at a food cupboard. There's so many opportunities for you to love your community, to express your faith in love, to serve humbly. What's holding you back? What's keeping you from loving your neighbor? See, we live in a world that's elevated to self. But we serve a God who tells us that the only way to truly find ourselves is to lose ourselves in service to others. If we want to be lifted up, we must first humble ourselves. If we want to be first, we must become last. This is the way of the kingdom. It's the way of the King. May we submit humbly to Him, that we might be used for His glory in this world. Chief end of man, to know God and enjoy Him forever. Friends, may we do that in service to others. May we use our freedom humbly and well. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.